The day my parents told me I wasn't family anymore, they smiled while they said it. 3 years later, they sat across from me in a conference room, looking terrified. Because the only lawyer capable of keeping them out of prison was the daughter they'd already buried. My name is Madison Walker, and I was 29 years old when my family learned that burning bridges works both ways. Before I tell you how my own parents disowned me, tried to erase me from their lives, and then begged for my help when everything collapsed. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoy stories where justice takes its time, but always finds the people who deserve it. Now let me explain how everything started. Growing up in my family always felt like competing in a game where someone else kept changing the rules. There were four of us: my father, Richard Walker; my mother, Diane Walker; my older brother, Ethan; and me. To anyone looking from the outside, we looked like one of those polished suburban families that belonged on Christmas cards. Large brick house, country club membership, family vacations every summer, matching sweaters for holiday pictures. The illusion was perfect. The reality wasn't. Ethan was the golden child. He was 2 years older than me, louder than me, and somehow every mistake he made became someone else's fault. If he forgot homework, the teacher was unreasonable. If he crashed Dad's SUV at 17, the roads were dangerous. If he failed classes in college, the professors were biased. Meanwhile, if I got a 96 instead of 100, what happened to the other 4 points? I learned very early that love in our house had conditions: performance, obedience, silence, especially silence. My mother used to say something almost every week. A good daughter keeps the peace, not tells the truth, not stands up for herself, keeps the peace. That sentence became the soundtrack of my childhood. Whenever Ethan mocked me, keep the peace. Whenever Dad dismissed my achievements, keep the peace. Whenever Mom volunteered me for chores while Ethan played video games, keep the peace. I became excellent at swallowing anger, excellent at smiling through disappointment, excellent at pretending things didn't hurt, until they did. The funny thing is, I never planned on becoming a lawyer. People assume I went into law because I liked arguing. Actually, I became a lawyer because I spent my whole childhood wishing someone would simply listen. Law school changed me, not overnight, slowly, like sunlight reaching into a room that's been dark for years. For the first time, people respected my opinions. Professors challenged my arguments instead of dismissing them. Classmates debated with me as an equal. No one told me to keep the peace. No one told me my thoughts mattered less because I was the daughter instead of the son. I discovered something dangerous: confidence. My parents hated it. Every holiday visit became an interrogation. When are you going to stop working those ridiculous hours? Aren't you getting a little old to still be single? You know, men don't like women who argue. Dad loved that one. He'd chuckle after saying it, like he'd delivered the funniest joke in history. Ethan would laugh with him. Mom would smile into her wine glass, and I'd pretend it didn't bother me. Until one Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving that destroyed our family. I almost didn't go. I had a major corporate case that was consuming every waking hour, but Mom called. You haven't missed Thanksgiving before. There was guilt in her voice, or maybe manipulation. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference, so I went. The house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, and expensive candles. Everything looked exactly the same. The same dining room, the same polished silverware, the same family portraits hanging on the wall. Except there was one new portrait: Ethan, his wife, their newborn son, framed in the center of the hallway. My graduation picture had been moved. Not removed, just moved. To a side table, smaller frame, less noticeable. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. Because somehow, it perfectly summarized my place in the family. still technically present, just off to the side. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Weather, football, vacation plans, my latest case. Dad barely acknowledged my answer. Then Ethan started talking about expanding the family business, Walker Construction, a company Dad had built over 30 years. "I'll probably be running everything within a year," Ethan announced proudly. Dad beamed. "You've earned it." I nearly choked on my drink. Earned it? Ethan barely showed up before noon most days. Everyone in town knew it. Half the employees quietly joked that he treated the office like a social club. Meanwhile, I'd spent years working 80-hour weeks to make partner. Still, I stayed quiet. Keep the peace. Then Dad said something that changed everything. "We're updating the estate plan next month." Mom smiled. "It's about time." Dad nodded toward Ethan. "We're making sure the business stays where it belongs." Something in his wording made my stomach tighten. "So," I asked carefully, "how's everything being divided?" Silence. Just silence. Dad looked almost annoyed I'd asked. "The company stays with Ethan." I assumed that. "The house too." "Okay. The lake property?" "All right. The investment account's connected to the business." I blinked. What exactly am I inheriting? Dad shrugged. "You've got your career." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't process what he'd just said. "You mean?" Dad interrupted. "The business belongs to the son." I looked at Mom. She didn't say anything. "Ethan gets everything?" Dad folded his napkin. "You don't need it." "I don't need to be treated equally?" "You chose your own path." "I became a lawyer." "Exactly. So, because I succeeded on my own?" Dad leaned back. "You aren't entitled to what I've built." I stared at him. "Ethan works there because you handed him a job. He'll continue the family legacy." "And I'm not family?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. The room went quiet. Mom sighed dramatically. "Madison." "No." I looked directly at Dad. "I want you to answer the question." His expression hardened. "The Walker name passes through Ethan." I felt something crack inside me. "So because I'm your daughter, you'll marry someday?" "What if I don't?" "You probably will." "And if I don't?" He shrugged. "It doesn't matter." I realized. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't conflicted. He genuinely believed this was fair. I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Because deep down, he knew. He knew he hadn't earned any of it. He just didn't care. I stood up. "So, let me get this straight." Dad rolled his eyes. "Here we go. You expect me to celebrate a family that openly values me less because I was born female." Mom immediately jumped in. "Don't make this about gender." "What else is it about?" "The business requires competence?" I laughed bitterly. "I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "You don't talk to your mother like that. And you don't erase your daughter because she isn't your son." The room exploded. Voices overlapped. Mom crying. Dad yelling. Ethan telling everyone to calm down without actually taking a side. Then Dad stood, pointed toward the front door. "If that's how you feel." His voice was cold. "You aren't family anymore." Everything stopped. Even the clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder. Tick, tick, tick. I waited. Surely someone would say he didn't mean it. Mom, Ethan, anyone. Nobody did. Dad repeated himself. "If you can't respect this family," he pointed again, "leave." I picked up my coat, my purse, my car keys. I looked at each of them one last time. "I hope none of you ever know what it feels like to have your own family choose convenience over love." Then I walked out. No one followed. Not one person. I drove home in absolute silence. No music, no podcasts, Nothing. Only the sound of my own breathing. I pulled into my apartment garage, turned off the engine, and finally cried. Not because I'd lost an inheritance, not because I'd lost money, because somewhere inside me, a little girl finally accepted something she'd been trying not to believe her entire life. She had never been loved the same. And once you truly understand that, you can never unknow it. I didn't answer any of their calls over the next week. Not that there were many. Mom left one voicemail. I know emotions were high. No apology. Dad left none. Ethan texted, "You overreacted." I deleted it. Then something arrived in the mail. A certified envelope. Inside, a single typed letter. It was signed by my father. It informed me that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings, no longer listed as an emergency contact, no longer included in any family financial planning. And one sentence stood out more than the rest. Consider this notice that you are no longer a member of the Walker family. I read it 3 times, then carefully folded it, placed it inside a folder, locked it away. Not because I planned revenge. Not then. Because every lawyer knows one simple truth. People who put terrible decisions in writing usually regret it later. At the time, I had no idea just how right that instinct would become. I wish I could tell you that walking away from my family made me feel free. It didn't. It felt like someone had amputated part of my life without anesthesia. People who haven't been through it imagine estrangement as one dramatic moment. A screaming match, a slammed door, maybe a final goodbye. They don't realize it's the 1,000 tiny moments afterward that really hurt. It's grocery shopping and automatically reaching for your mother's favorite coffee before remembering she isn't coming over anymore. It's driving past your childhood neighborhood and realizing there isn't a single reason to turn onto that street. It's hearing someone laugh exactly the way your brother used to and feeling your stomach twist before your brain catches up. Those little moments lasted much longer than the fight itself. For weeks, I slept terribly. I'd wake up around 3 every morning with the same dream. I'd be standing outside my parents' front door. I could hear everyone inside laughing. Plates clinked together. Someone was telling one of Dad's terrible jokes. I reached for the doorknob. It wouldn't open, no matter how hard I pushed. Then I'd hear my father's voice through the door. "You're not family anymore." I'd wake up before sunrise every single time. My apartment felt impossibly quiet. For years, I'd complained that I never had enough peace because work followed me home. Now silence felt heavier than noise. One Friday night, I stood in my kitchen staring at 2 wine glasses I'd accidentally taken out of the cabinet. I laughed at myself. Then I cried because I was laughing. Grief is strange like that. It sneaks into ordinary moments. Work became the only place where my thoughts finally stopped chasing me. I was a senior associate at one of the largest litigation firms in the state. Corporate disputes, commercial fraud, civil litigation. The cases were enormous, millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions. Every file that landed on my desk represented someone's fortune, someone's reputation, someone's future. Oddly enough, that responsibility grounded me. In court, there were rules. Evidence mattered. Facts mattered. Logic mattered. No judge had ever looked at me and said, "Your argument would be stronger if you were someone's son." That was comforting. Painful, but comforting. One Monday morning, my supervising partner, Helen Brooks, walked into my office carrying 3 thick binders. Helen terrified almost everyone. She had silver hair cut into a sharp bob, never smiled during negotiations, and possessed the supernatural ability to detect dishonesty before people even opened their mouths. She set the binders on my desk. "I've been watching you." My stomach tightened. Those words rarely led anywhere pleasant. "I hope that's a good thing." "It depends." She folded her arms. "Your billable hours are absurd." "I've been busy." You've billed more hours this quarter than anyone in litigation. I know. You've also stopped taking lunch. I blinked. I didn't realize anyone noticed. I notice everything. That sounded exactly like Helen. She looked around my office. Neat desk, perfectly organized files, fresh legal pads, everything in its place, except me. You look exhausted. I'm fine. No. She said it quietly. You're functioning. There was a difference. I looked away. I'm all right. She waited. Helen never rushed silence. Eventually I sighed. My family and I aren't speaking. Death? Worse. She nodded once. I understand. That surprised me. She'd never mentioned much about her personal life. My father cut me off 30 years ago. I looked back at her. You. He wanted a son to inherit his practice. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I became competition instead. She smiled. A tiny one. The irony still makes me laugh. I couldn't help smiling back. She pushed the binders toward me. I was going to assign these to someone else. What changed? I don't think you need less work. I raised an eyebrow. You need work that reminds you who you are. I looked down. The top binder contained one of the biggest commercial fraud cases the firm had accepted all year. You're giving me lead counsel? I'm recommending you. That's partner-level responsibility. You've been performing at partner level for 2 years. I stared at her. Why now? Because someday you'll understand something. What? The people who underestimate you are often the ones preparing you for your greatest opportunity. For the next 18 months, my life became courtrooms, depositions, airports, conference rooms, and legal strategy. I won. Again. And again. And again. One case settled for $43 million after 6 brutal weeks of negotiations. Another ended in a unanimous jury verdict. Clients specifically requested me. Opposing counsel learned to stop underestimating the quiet woman carrying 3 color-coded binders. I developed a reputation. Not flashy, not theatrical, methodical, prepared, impossible to rattle. The newspapers occasionally quoted me. Legal journals mentioned my arguments. By 29, I became the youngest equity partner in the firm's history. The celebration dinner was held on the rooftop of our office building. Champagne, city lights, a skyline glowing against the evening sky. Helen raised her glass. To Madison. Everyone applauded. You earned every inch of this. For just a second, I wondered what it would have been like if my parents had been there. Would Dad finally have been proud? Would Mom have bragged to her friends? Would Ethan have congratulated me? The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, because another realization replaced it. I hadn't thought about them all day. That felt new. Healing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's simply noticing that someone who used to occupy your thoughts every hour now only crosses your mind once every few weeks. That's when you realize you've been moving forward without even noticing. The first sign that something was wrong came from a complete stranger. I was grabbing coffee before work when an older man stared at me a little too long. Finally, he walked over. You're Richard Walker's daughter, aren't you? I hesitated. I was. He frowned. I heard there was some kind of family disagreement. There was? He scratched the back of his neck. Huh. What? I figured you'd be working for the construction company by now. I almost laughed. No. I guess that's lucky. Something about his tone made me pause. Lucky? He looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't gossip. What happened? He lowered his voice. I do accounting work around town. I waited. Walker Construction has been different lately. Different how? They've been moving money around. My lawyer instincts immediately woke up. What kind of money? I didn't say that. You implied it. I shouldn't have. He took his coffee. Forget I mentioned anything. He left before I could ask another question. I stood there holding my cup without taking a sip. Moving money. That phrase could mean 100 different things. Perfectly legal restructuring, aggressive tax planning, or something else. I pushed it out of my mind. They weren't my family anymore. Not my business. Not my problem. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. 3 months later, I attended a charity fundraiser hosted by the local bar association. Lawyers, judges, business owners, the usual crowd. Near the end of the evening, I found myself talking with Judge Franklin after everyone else had drifted toward the dessert table. He casually asked where I'd grown up. When I answered, his eyebrows lifted. The Walkers? Yes. I handled a contract dispute involving your father's company years ago. I wasn't involved. No. He nodded thoughtfully. I remember. There was something strange in the way he said it. You remember what? That you weren't. I didn't understand. The company's outside counsel kept mentioning your academic record. My academic record? They expected you to join the business eventually. I never planned to. He smiled politely. They seemed disappointed. That made no sense. My father had never wanted me anywhere near the company. The conversation ended there, but the inconsistency lingered. Why would the company's attorneys expect me to join a business my father insisted belonged exclusively to Ethan? Unless plans had changed somewhere along the way, or someone had lied. I dismissed the thought. Again. Then came the newspaper article. Small headline. Buried on page 6. Local construction firm faces regulatory review. Walker Construction. The article didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply mentioned delayed financial disclosures, questions about municipal contracts, and an upcoming review by state regulators. Routine, at least on paper. Still, I clipped the article not because I cared, because lawyers develop habits. Information has a way of connecting itself later. Sometimes months later. Sometimes years. I tucked the clipping into the same folder that still contained my father's letter. The letter declaring I wasn't family. I had no idea those two pieces of paper would eventually become part of the same story. Late one evening, after another 14-hour workday, I was leaving the office when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. Hello? Silence. Then breathing. Finally. Madison? I recognized the voice instantly. My mother. I froze. 3 years. 3 years without a meaningful conversation. How did you get this number? You still sound like yourself. Why are you calling? Another pause. I wanted to see how you were. No. I stepped into the empty elevator. You wanted something. I miss you. The words landed strangely. Not comforting. Suspicious. You told me I wasn't your daughter anymore. Your father said that. You agreed. Silence. Again. I never stopped loving you. I closed my eyes. 3 years ago, those words would have shattered me. Now, they simply didn't fit the facts. Mom. My voice stayed calm. What do you need? She inhaled slowly. Your father doesn't know I called. That wasn't my question. I just wanted to hear your voice. No. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, she whispered. Things have become complicated. The elevator doors opened into the empty lobby. What kind of complicated? I can't explain over the phone. Then I guess this conversation is over. Madison. She sounded frightened. Not guilty, not emotional. Frightened. If something happened, she swallowed. Would you at least listen? I looked through the glass entrance toward the dark parking lot outside. For the first time in years, I felt that old knot returning to my stomach. Not because I missed them, Because lawyers develop instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me something enormous was about to happen. I just didn't know what or why. After throwing me out of their lives, my family had suddenly remembered that I existed. My mother called again 2 days later. This time, I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Not dramatic, not emotional, just 6 words. Please, it's about your father. I stared at the notification for nearly a minute before deleting it. 3 years earlier, I would have rushed to find out what was wrong. I would have convinced myself that this was finally the apology I'd been waiting for. Now, I recognized something I'd learned through years of litigation. Urgency is often manufactured. People who ignored you yesterday rarely discover your importance overnight without a reason. Whatever had happened, it wasn't because they suddenly realized they loved me. It was because they suddenly needed me. That difference mattered. A week later, I found out what was happening completely by accident. I was leaving the courthouse after a scheduling conference when Helen caught up with me. "You've been avoiding the news." It wasn't a question. "I've been busy." She handed me a folded copy of the local business journal. "Read page 3. There, beneath a headline about commercial development, was a much larger story. State investigates Walker Construction over municipal contracts. I stopped walking. The article alleged that state investigators had subpoenaed financial records connected to several public infrastructure projects. No criminal charges, not yet. But words like fraud, false billing, bid manipulation, and financial misrepresentation appeared often enough to make my stomach tighten. Not because I was worried for my parents, because I understood what those words could become. Civil investigations had a habit of turning criminal when enough evidence surfaced. Helen watched my expression. "You know them." "I used to." "You'll probably receive a phone call." "I already have." She nodded as though she'd expected that. "Be careful." "I always am." "No." She looked directly into my eyes. "Be careful emotionally." That landed harder than I expected. Over the next month, the investigation dominated local conversation. Everywhere. Restaurants, coffee shops, the courthouse. People lowered their voices when they mentioned the Walker name. Some defended my father. Richard built half this town. Others weren't as generous. I always wondered how they won every public contract. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. Millions missing. Bribery. Fake invoices. Shell companies. Most of it was probably nonsense. Rumors usually are. But investigations don't begin without smoke. And experienced lawyers know that where there is enough smoke for prosecutors to spend resources, someone has probably found fire. Then my receptionist called. "Madison?" "Yes?" "There's a Mr. Richard Walker here." Everything inside me went still. "He doesn't have an appointment." "I know." "Did you tell him that?" "Twice." "And?" "He says he'll wait." I looked out my office window. Rain streaked across the glass. Gray skies. The city looked unusually quiet. "I'll come down." When the elevator doors opened into the reception area, I barely recognized him. My father had always seemed larger than life. Perfect posture, expensive suits, a booming voice that filled every room. Now, his shoulders sagged. His hair had turned noticeably grayer. Deep lines surrounded his eyes. He looked older than 62. He looked tired. When he saw me, he stood immediately. "Madison." "Richard." His expression flickered. I had never called him by his first name before. He deserved to feel exactly how distant we'd become. "I'd like 5 minutes. I'm working." "It won't take long." I glanced toward reception. Half the office had already noticed. Law firms thrive on discretion, but they're powered by curiosity. I'll give you 5. I led him into a small conference room. The silence after the door closed felt almost unbearable. He looked around. You've done well. I have. I'm proud of you. I almost laughed. 3 years. Not one congratulations. Not one birthday card. Not one phone call. And now, proud isn't a word you get to use. He lowered his eyes. I suppose I earned that. What do you want? He inhaled slowly. Our attorneys withdrew. All of them? Yes. Why? They cited conflicts. That wasn't true. Or at least, not entirely. Law firms withdraw from clients for many reasons. Non-payment, ethical issues, discovery problems, loss of confidence. When several firms withdrew at once, something was seriously wrong. He reached into his briefcase. I'd like you to represent us. The room became perfectly silent. I looked at the folder, then back at him. You disowned me. I know. You told me I wasn't family. I know. You put it in writing. I know. And now you want me to defend you? Yes. He didn't try to justify it. Didn't pretend otherwise. Just, yes. I folded my hands. Why me? Because you're the best. No. I shook my head. That's not enough. He hesitated, then admitted something I never expected to hear. Because everyone else thinks we're guilty. That sentence echoed through the room. Everyone else thinks we're guilty. Lawyers rarely abandon wealthy clients unless they believe continuing representation could create ethical or reputational problems. For every major firm to walk away, the evidence had to be substantial. What exactly are you accused of? We didn't steal anything. I didn't ask what you didn't do. He looked uncomfortable. There were accounting irregularities. Caused by? Our chief financial officer. Were you aware? No. Can you prove that? Silence. There it was. The answer. No, he couldn't. I pushed the folder back across the table. I won't represent you. His face fell. Please. No. I'll pay whatever your firm charges. This isn't about money. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I leaned forward. Mistakes are forgetting birthdays. Mistakes are missing recitals. You erased me from your family because I questioned your favoritism. His shoulders slumped. I was wrong. Were you wrong then? He looked confused. What? Or are you only wrong because you need something? He couldn't answer, because he knew. And so did I. He stood to leave. At the door, he stopped. Your mother is very sick. My heart skipped despite everything. What happened? Stress. That's not a diagnosis. He rubbed his forehead. High blood pressure. Hospital? Last week. I closed my eyes briefly. Old instincts tried to return. Concern, responsibility, guilt. Then another voice spoke louder. The rational one. If he'd begun the conversation with that information, I might have believed it was about family. Instead, he'd saved it for the end. A final argument. One last attempt to persuade me. That told me everything. I'm sorry she's unwell. I opened the conference room door. But my answer is still no. He nodded once. Slowly. I understand. For the first time in my life, I think he actually did. That evening, Helen invited me into her office. I heard. News travels fast. It always does. She poured 2 cups of coffee. Do you want to know why the other firms withdrew? You know. I know enough. She slid a legal memorandum across her desk. It wasn't confidential. It summarized publicly available filings, subpoenas, accounting requests, email preservation orders, search warrants for company records. I scanned the pages. Then one name caught my attention. Ethan Walker, Chief Operating Officer. I frowned. He wasn't COO before. He became COO about 2 years ago. Right after I'd been disowned. The timing wasn't lost on me. Helen quietly observed me. "What are you thinking? That if I had stayed, you would have held that position?" I looked up. She nodded. "I've heard that from 3 different people." Suddenly, dozens of memories aligned. The company attorneys expecting me to join, the judge mentioning old succession plans, the conversations that never quite made sense. My father hadn't always intended to leave everything to Ethan. Something had changed. And whatever had changed had happened shortly before Thanksgiving. Helen broke the silence. "You've spent years believing you weren't chosen because you weren't good enough." I didn't answer. "You might want to consider another possibility." "What?" "They couldn't control you." The words hit with stunning force. I replayed years of family dinners. Every time I'd questioned something, every time I'd asked for explanations, every time Ethan had been excused while I demanded accountability. I wasn't less capable. I was less manageable. Someone willing to read contracts, ask questions, demand documentation, would have been dangerous inside a company built on unquestioned loyalty. Ethan, on the other hand, never questioned anything his father said, because he never needed to. He inherited trust instead of earning it. And perhaps that had cost everyone more than anyone realized. As I drove home that night, rain tapped softly against the windshield. For years, I'd believed I had been rejected because I wasn't enough. Now, another possibility settled into my mind. Maybe I had been rejected because I would have noticed the cracks long before anyone else. And if that was true, the investigation into Walker Construction wasn't just exposing financial records. It was exposing the real reason my family had pushed me out. Not because I wasn't family, but because I was the one person who might have refused to help bury the truth. I didn't know exactly where that truth would lead, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next time my family came looking for me, it wouldn't be because they wanted forgiveness. It would be because the truth had finally caught up with them. The next time my father called, I answered. Not because I'd changed my mind, because I finally had enough information to ask the questions that mattered. He sounded exhausted. "We've been indicted." There it was. The sentence he'd spent months trying to avoid. "What are the charges?" He listed them quietly. Conspiracy, wire fraud, false statements connected to public contracts, obstruction related to destroyed company records. The last charge made me stop taking notes. Destroyed records? His silence answered before he did. "Who authorized that?" "I don't know." I believed that he believed he didn't know. Whether that was true was another matter. "We need someone we can trust," he said. I closed the notebook in front of me. "You don't need trust." "What do you mean?" "You need competence." There was another pause. "You always were direct." "I learned from you." After the call ended, I sat alone in my office until long after sunset. Outside, the city lights reflected against the windows. Inside, I spread every publicly available filing across the conference table. I wasn't building a defense. I was trying to understand a family. Every corporate chart, every timeline, every amended filing, every appointment. One detail appeared again and again. Ethan. Every questionable transaction had occurred after he became Chief Operating Officer. Every internal approval passed across his desk. Every financial certification carried his signature. That didn't prove he was guilty, but it proved he was central. Then another realization struck me. There were almost no documents bearing my father's signature during the relevant period. Richard Walker had built the company, but in its final years he had stepped back. He had trusted his son, blindly, the same way he'd never trusted his daughter. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. A week later, I received a formal request from the court. Not to represent my family, to serve as a neutral expert during a dispute over privileged corporate records. Another firm represented the company. The prosecution challenged whether certain communications were protected by attorney-client privilege. The judge needed an independent legal expert to review the materials and provide recommendations. It was exactly the kind of assignment my reputation had earned, and because I had never represented Walker Construction, there was no conflict. I accepted. Not because of my family, because the court had asked. Justice deserved impartiality, especially when emotions ran high. The courtroom felt strangely familiar. The polished wooden benches, the quiet conversations before proceedings began, the steady rhythm of attorneys arranging files. Then I saw them. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Age and stress had softened the certainty that once defined her. My father avoided looking around the room. Ethan looked angry, not frightened, not ashamed, angry, as if the entire legal process were inconveniencing him. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He looked away first. The review process lasted nearly 3 weeks. Thousands of emails, internal memoranda, accounting notes, board minutes. Most were routine. Some were sloppy. A handful were deeply concerning. What surprised me most wasn't evidence of a grand conspiracy. It was something far more ordinary. Cowardice. People seeing problems and choosing silence. Managers approving invoices they hadn't read. Executives signing reports prepared by others. Employees assuming someone else had verified the numbers. No single document screamed corruption. Together. They painted a picture of a company where accountability had slowly disappeared. Then I found one email. It wasn't dramatic. Only 4 sentences. From Ethan. Don't send this to Dad yet. He'll overreact. I'll clean it up before he sees it. Attached was an earlier financial report. The numbers differed significantly from the version eventually submitted. That email changed everything. Not because it proved criminal intent, because it established knowledge that became impossible to ignore. When my report was submitted, I recommended that several categories of documents were not protected by privilege because they involved business decisions rather than legal advice. The judge agreed. Those records became admissible. The prosecution gained access. So did the defense. The truth became easier for everyone to see. Not my truth. The document's truth. Exactly as it should be. Months later, the criminal trial began. I wasn't involved. I watched only a portion of it from the public gallery. Witnesses testified. Experts explained accounting practices. Former employees described internal pressure to meet impossible financial targets. One testimony stayed with me. A project manager admitted he'd noticed discrepancies years earlier. "Why didn't you report them?" the prosecutor asked. He lowered his head. "I didn't want to lose my job." Fear. The oldest accomplice in history. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't simple. Real life rarely is. My father was acquitted on the most serious fraud counts. The jury concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove he knowingly participated. He was, however, found responsible for failures in corporate oversight that carried civil penalties and professional consequences. His reputation never fully recovered. Ethan's outcome was different. The evidence showed repeated decisions that could not be explained as oversight alone. He was convicted on multiple financial offenses. As the verdict was read, he stared straight ahead. No outburst, no dramatic protest, just disbelief. For perhaps the first time in his life, someone had told him that consequences applied to him too. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. Cameras flashed. microphones stretched toward anyone willing to speak. I slipped through a side exit. Justice doesn't need applause. It certainly didn't need mine. As I reached the parking lot, I heard someone call my name. Madison. My mother. She stood alone. No cameras nearby. No lawyers. No audience. Just us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I owe you an apology." I didn't interrupt. I spent years confusing peace with silence. A sad smile crossed her face. Every time your father dismissed you, every time Ethan was excused, I told myself I was keeping the family together. She looked toward the courthouse. I wasn't. She looked back at me. I was helping it fall apart. Tears filled her eyes. I should have stood beside you. I believed she meant it. Not because of the tears, because there was nothing left for her to gain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words I'd wanted to hear for years had finally arrived. Strangely, they didn't erase anything. Apologies don't rewrite history. They acknowledge it. And sometimes, that's enough. "I accept your apology," I said quietly. Her shoulders relaxed. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Can we be a family again?" I took a slow breath. "I don't know." Honesty was kinder than false hope. "I've built a life that doesn't depend on your approval." She nodded. "I understand." "If we're ever going to have a relationship," I continued, "it won't be because we're pretending the past didn't happen. It'll be because we choose to build something different." She wiped her eyes. "I'd like that." "So would I. But it will take time." She smiled through her tears. "I have time." A month later, I visited my father. Not in a courtroom, not in an office. On the front porch of the house where I'd grown up. He looked older than I remembered. The confidence that had once filled every sentence had been replaced by careful thought. "I was unfair to you," he said before I even sat down. "Yes. I thought I was protecting the business." "You were protecting your assumptions." He nodded slowly. "I confused obedience with loyalty." Neither of us spoke for a while. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had when I was a child. Children rode bicycles down the street. Someone mowed a lawn nearby. Life had continued, as it always does. "I kept your graduation photo," he said quietly. "I know." He looked surprised. "I saw where you moved it." His eyes dropped. "I should have put it in the center." I smiled sadly. It was never about the picture. I know. This time, I believed he really did. People sometimes ask whether revenge made me happy. The truth is, this was never about revenge. It was about refusing to become the person my family expected. They expected me to come back desperate for acceptance. Instead, I built a life where acceptance wasn't something they could give or take away. They thought cutting me out would make me smaller. It forced me to become stronger. In the end, the courtroom didn't save my family. The truth did. Some relationships survived. Some didn't. Trust returned slowly in small moments rather than grand gestures, and a few things were lost forever. But one thing was never lost again. My voice. The little girl who was told to keep the peace finally grew into a woman who understood something far more important. Peace built on silence is only another kind of prison. Real peace begins the moment you decide your dignity is worth protecting, even when the people you love refuse to protect it with you. That was the greatest victory I ever won. Not against my family, but for myself. Looking back now, I don't measure justice by who won or who lost in court. I measure it by what changed afterward. My father finally accepted responsibility instead of demanding obedience. My mother learned that avoiding conflict can be just as damaging as causing it. And I learned that forgiveness isn't a door you unlock for someone else. It's the moment you stop carrying the weight of proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. I was never not family. I was simply the first person willing to tell the truth. If this story reminded you that standing up for yourself often comes with a price, but that your self-respect is worth paying for, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell me honestly, if you were in my position, would you have helped your family when they came back? Or would you have walked away for good? Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's about becoming someone no one can ever diminish again.